In the 1970s, Bashir Kuchachi survived being kidnapped and tortured in Beirut after his captors accused him of being a CIA agent. Years later, after rebuilding his life in America, the phone began to ring. At first there was only silence, then laughter, then a childlike voice that seemed to know where he was, who he knew, and how afraid he had become. They called it l'enfant, the child, and for Bashir, the nightmare was only just beginning.
Ever notice how life's best stories don't happen in your living room? They happen on the open road, out on the water, or parked under the stars. At Progressive, they get that you want to focus on the experience, not worry about the what-ifs. That's why they offer quality insurance designed for your ride, whether that's a boat, RV, or motorcycle. Adventure with confidence. Visit Progressive.com and see how easy it is to protect your favorite way to get away. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in D.C. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Ever walk past a place for rent and wish you could just take a peek inside? Maybe even explore the layout. Envision the natural light streaming through the windows. Or plan where your vinyl record collection would go. At Apartments.com, you can. With tools like their 3D virtual tours, you can see the exact unit you could be living in. Really envision yourself in your new home with Apartments.com, the place to find a place.
Quick question. When was the last time a display ad changed your mind? Now think about the last time a friend told you about something they loved. Different feeling, right? That's how podcast advertising works. A host who's built real trust with their audience talks about your brand in their own words, in their own voice. It doesn't interrupt the experience. It's part of it. With Acast, you can access the world's largest podcast marketplace. Choose the right shows, the right audiences, the right format. Then watch the data tell you it worked. You're not buying impressions. You're buying influence. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.
You've got social dialed in. Search is doing its thing. So why do your marketing results look the same as 6 months ago? That's because you're fishing in the same pond as everyone else. Podcast listeners are a different audience entirely. More engaged, harder to reach through traditional channels, and ready to act when someone they trust makes a recommendation. We're Acast, and we put them right in front of you. Browse thousands of the world's leading podcasts, book host reads or run your own ads, and track every conversion in real time. Same skills you already have, brand new results. Acast. Acast.com/advertise.
Hello, I'm Sarah and welcome to the Whispering Woods After Dark. I've got a cracker of the story today. I'll get straight into it. Are you ready for the story? Before the calls began, before the childlike voice, before the threats that seemed to follow him from city to city, Bashir Kuchachi had already survived one nightmare. His name is usually given as Bashir Gabi Kuchachi, and in contemporary reporting, he was described as Syrian-born, raised in Lebanon, Armenian Catholic, and later a citizen of the United States. By the 1970s, he had built a life that moved between cultures and countries. And in 1974, he was in Beirut with his American wife, who was working as a professional singer. At that time, Beirut was still known in some circles for glamour, nightlife, hotels, music, diplomats, money, and political intrigue. But beneath that surface, the region was already unstable. Lebanon would soon be pulled into civil war, and the lines between politics, intelligence, armed factions, business, and personal danger were not always clear to those living inside it. Bashir's wife was performing at the Phoenicia Hotel, a luxury hotel that drew wealthy guests from across the Middle East. It was the sort of place where ordinary conversations might happen within earshot of people carrying secrets, where a singer, a restaurant worker, or a businessman might brush against a world far more dangerous than their own without fully understanding it. On the night of July the 1st, 1974, Bashir left to collect his wife from a party. Some accounts say the party was hosted by a Saudi princess. He was driving his Mercedes through Beirut when another vehicle forced him off the road. Armed men got out. Bashir, not yet understanding what was happening, tried to reason with them, but there was no conversation to be had. They dragged him from the car. A covering was forced over his head. Then he was taken away. When he became aware of his surroundings again, he was not in a police station or any official place where questions might be answered. He was in a dark room, reportedly a basement, bound and held by men who gave him no clear explanation for why he had been taken. He did not know where he was. He did not know who had him. He did not know whether his wife knew he was missing. At first he hoped it was a mistake that could be corrected. Maybe they thought he was someone else. Maybe they wanted money. Maybe they were looking for a politician or someone with influence. And once they realized he was none of those things, they would let him go. But when his captors questioned him, the misunderstanding did not clear. It deepened. According to Bashir's later account, when he told them he was an American citizen, they accused him of being connected to the CIA. That accusation changed everything. He was not treated as a confused civilian who had been taken by mistake. He was treated as someone hiding information. And for days, the men holding him tried to force answers from him. They beat him. They interrogated him. They asked about people and situations he said he knew nothing about. He was deprived of rest, given little food, and trapped in a cycle where pain became the only way to measure time. Hours lost meaning. Days blurred. Without daylight, without ordinary routine, and without any clear understanding of what his captors wanted, Bashir began to break down. In later retellings, he said he started hallucinating. He believed he could hear the screams of family members nearby, calling for him, suffering somewhere beyond the walls, while he could do nothing to help them. He reached a point where death seemed preferable to remaining in that room. Using a sharp piece of plastic, Bashir cut his wrists. What happened next made little sense to him then, and little sense to anyone hearing the story later. Rather than allowing him to die, his captors took him to hospital. There, doctors saved his life. Through a combination of medical intervention and negotiation, Bashir survived the abduction and was eventually released. But survival did not mean escape. The body can be moved from a place long before the mind leaves it. Bashir came out of that basement alive, but with scars, trauma, and questions he could not answer. Who had taken him? And why him? Had they genuinely mistaken him for an intelligence agent? Or had there been some other reason? Had he seen or heard something in Beirut without realizing its importance? Had someone decided, somewhere in that city of hotels, parties, politics, and armed groups, that Bashir was dangerous? Later, State Department records obtained through his Freedom of Information requests reportedly indicated that he had been abducted by a rogue faction linked to the PLO, who had mistakenly believed he was a CIA agent. But even that did not explain everything Bashir would later endure. Because after Beirut, he tried to rebuild his life. He left Lebanon. He returned to the United States. His marriage ended. He began again in California, working in the restaurant world, trying to shape something normal out of what remained. For a while, it almost looked as though he had succeeded. But years later, in Washington, D.C., a phone began to ring. And on the other end was silence, then laughter, then a voice that would become known only as L'Enfant. After Beirut, Bashir tried to do what many survivors tried to do. He moved forward, because standing still would have meant living inside the worst thing that had ever happened to him. He returned to the United States, and eventually his life began to reorganize itself around restaurants. For a time he worked in the industry in Los Angeles, including at Dar Meghreb on Sunset Boulevard, before he and his sister Viviane opened the first Marrakesh restaurant in Philadelphia in 1977. The restaurant was successful, and for Bashir, Philadelphia seemed to offer something close to recovery. It was busy, practical, and far away from Beirut in every sense that mattered. The work gave him structure. There were staff to manage, guests to welcome, food to serve, problems to solve, and long hours that left little space for old memories to move around freely. In public, Bashir could be charming and capable, the kind of host and businessman people remembered warmly. Behind that, the trauma had not disappeared, but it had become something he could function around. For a while, that may have felt like enough. Then, in the early 1980s, Bashir and Viviane decided to expand again, this time to Washington, D.C. It made sense as a business move. Washington was international, politically connected, and full of the sort of clientele that might appreciate a Moroccan restaurant with atmosphere. Bashir also later suggested that part of him hoped the move might help him repair the damage he believed had been done to his name after the abduction. Almost as if being visible in Washington's diplomatic world might prove he had nothing to hide. For Bashir, it was also a place where diplomats, officials, foreign communities, lobbyists, journalists, and intelligence rumours all moved close together. If Beirut had been the city where he was accused of being something he was not, Washington may have seemed like the city where he could finally clear himself. Instead, it became the city where the past found him again. During construction of the new Marrakesh restaurant in northwest DC, a phone line was installed. Bashir travelled down from Philadelphia to supervise the work, and soon after, the phone began ringing. At first there was no voice, just silence. A receiver lifted somewhere else, someone breathing or listening, then nothing. The sort of call most people would dismiss once or twice. A wrong number, a fault on the line, someone too nervous or childish to speak. Then it happened again, and again. When Bashir connected an answering machine, the messages became stranger. There was laughter, small sounds, tisking noises, the kind of meaningless recordings that become frightening only through repetition, because each one proves that whoever is calling has chosen you deliberately. At first, those around the restaurant tried to treat it lightly. They gave the caller a name, L'Enfant, the child. It was a way of making the situation manageable, almost absurd. If the phone rang and the same strange, childish voice or laughter came through, staff would say that was l'enfant, as if naming it reduced its power. But the calls did not remain harmless. Once the DC Marrakesh opened, the harassment escalated. The voice or voices on the line began threatening people. There were obscene remarks, death threats, crude conversations, and strange imitations. Sometimes the callers sounded like a young girl, sometimes like a small child, sometimes like adults with Middle Eastern accents. Other times, according to later accounts, there were screams, laughter, or the sound of machine gun fire in the background. The restaurant phone became a source of dread. For most businesses, a ringing phone means a booking. For Marrakesh, it became something else. Each ring carried the possibility of another threat, another reminder, another voice reaching into the room from nowhere. And the caller seemed to know things. That was what made it more than a prank. Bashir believed the person on the line knew private details about his life, his relationships, his history, and people he had not spoken to in years. Calls reportedly followed him when he went to the Philadelphia restaurant, and the Los Angeles Times described how, when he walked to the DC Marrakesh, the phone would sometimes ring almost immediately, as though someone had been waiting for him to arrive. That is the point when nuisance becomes surveillance. A prankster irritates you. A stalker studies you. And whoever l'enfant was, Bashir became convinced this was not random harassment. To him, the calls were connected to Beirut, the accusation and the basement, the men who believed he was CIA, the things he might have seen and not realised were important at the time. Around him, other people were not so sure what to believe, but they could not dismiss the calls themselves. They were too frequent. The phone kept ringing, day after day, week after week, month after month, and over time, the sound of that ring began to change Bashir's life all over again. According to the Los Angeles Times, the calls became so frequent that staff began to recognize the pattern. The phone would ring, someone would answer, sometimes there would be silence at first, then laughter, then a voice that might be high, childish, mocking, or disguised. At other times, the caller made direct threats, using obscenities or promising harm. Bashir believed the voice was not always the same person, and that was the part of what made it impossible to understand. It felt less like one harasser and more like a network. The calls did not seem tied to one location. That was what unnerved him the most. If Bashir was at the Washington restaurant, they came there. If he travelled to Philadelphia, calls came there too. The Los Angeles Times reported that he believed the caller knew where he was and could reach him almost instantly. At times, staff described the phone ringing shortly after Bashir had entered the building, as if somebody outside had watched him arrive and then signalled for the harassment to begin. For Bashir, this was not abstract fear. He'd already been taken once by men who accused him of being something he insisted he was not. He'd already learned that an ordinary journey through a city could become captivity without warning. Now, years later, the call seemed to carry the same accusation back into his life. Only this time there was no basement he could point to, and no captors he could identify. It was everywhere the phone could reach him. No single place where the nightmare was happening. It was everywhere the phone could reach. Was this revenge, a warning, a mistake that had somehow followed him across the world? Or something more bizarre than any of those explanations? The calls were not occasional, they were relentless. Some summaries of the case describe 15 to 20 calls a day, continuing for years. The Los Angeles Times gave an estimate of roughly 7,000 abusive calls across a period of 3 or 4 years, a number so large it stops feeling like harassment and begins to feel like siege. Eventually, the authorities became involved. The phone company and the FBI monitored the situation. According to the Los Angeles Times, the line was traced for more than 2 years, and investigators were able to determine that many of the calls came from public phones across the Washington metropolitan area. That alone made the case stranger. Calls seemed to come from different payphones in different places, sometimes close together in time, suggesting either more than one person or someone with an ability to move and coordinate in ways that were hard to pin down. The FBI looked into it, but eventually closed the case. There was no clear suspect or arrest, no explanation that satisfied Bashir. From the outside, that may sound frustrating. From inside his life, it may have felt devastating. If the FBI could not tell him who was calling, if federal investigators could not stop the harassment, then what chance did he have? The phone kept ringing, and then the fear moved beyond the receiver. For a long time, the terror in Bashir's life came through a wire. Then things began to happen away from the phone. According to later accounts of the case, Bashir found strange marks carved beneath his Mercedes. Not a message left where any passerby could see it, but something placed where he would eventually find it and understand that someone had been close enough to touch his car. Then came something more dangerous. The car began overheating, and when Bashir looked beneath the hood, he reportedly found that the spark plug wires had been tampered with. Some accounts say they had been connected in a way that could have caused an explosion if the attempt had been completed properly. Whether the mechanics of that threat are described perfectly in later retellings is hard to verify, but the meaning was clear enough to Bashir. Someone had interfered with the machine he trusted to carry him through the city. After that, even the act of starting a car could become frightening. Most people turn a key without thinking. Bashir had to wonder whether the engine might kill him. The harassment also spread to those around him. In the Unsolved Mysteries account, after Bashir checked himself into a mental health facility under the pressure of the calls, the new manager at the Washington restaurant became part of the nightmare. His young son was reportedly attacked by 2 men while walking home from school, beaten without any explanation that made sense at the time. Soon afterward, Les Enfants called the restaurant and claimed responsibility for the attack. That moment changed everything. The calls were no longer just threats. They were connected, or at least appeared to be connected, to violence. The next morning, according to the same account, a message was found spray painted on the manager's front door, warning that his son would die. Again, the story is difficult to independently verify from the strongest contemporary article, so it should be treated carefully, but it's one of the most repeated and disturbing elements of the case. And still the phone kept ringing. The calls reached him not only in restaurants, but reportedly in hospitals and treatment facilities. Bashir had checked himself in because the stress had become unbearable. He needed safety and rest and distance from the daily siege of the phone. Instead, according to reports, Les Enfants found him there too. At that point, even rational explanations began to feel insufficient. There may have been insiders, there may have been observation. Someone may have tracked him through staff, paperwork, contacts, or simple persistence. But to the person receiving the calls, the mechanics hardly matter. The experience is the same. There is nowhere safe. That is why this case feels almost supernatural, even when told as a real crime. Not because there is evidence of ghosts or demons, but because the caller behaves like something out of folklore. A voice that knows where you are, a presence that enters locked places, a threat that survives distance, a childlike laugh attached to adult malice. And behind it all was Beirut. Bashir could not separate the calls from the abduction. He'd been seized by men who thought he was an intelligence agent, tortured for information he said he did not have, then released into a life that never fully returned to normal. Years later, someone began calling with knowledge, threats, and persistence far beyond ordinary harassment. By the time the calls had followed Bashir into hospitals and treatment centres, the mystery had stopped being a question he could put aside during quiet moments. It had become the structure of his life. He could not simply choose not to answer the phone, because the phone belonged to businesses, staff, customers, family, and the ordinary work of keeping a restaurant alive. He could not simply move, because the calls had already shown that distance did not seem to matter. He could not simply dismiss them as pranksters, because the callers appeared to know too much, and because the harassment had reportedly spilled out into physical threats, car tampering, and violence against someone close to the restaurant. For Bashir, the world began to divide into two versions of itself. There was the visible world, where customers came to Marrakesh. Staff carried food through warm rooms, guests laughed over dinner, and the business he had built looked successful from the outside. Then there was the hidden world behind it, where a voice might be waiting, where strangers on the street might be watching, where every ringing phone could mean the past had reached forward again. In contemporary reporting, those around him did not describe a man inventing a problem for attention. They described a man worn down by something real, even if nobody could explain exactly what that reality was. Thousands of abusive calls have been documented or estimated over the years. The case was not simply Bashir saying he felt haunted by a voice. There were enough calls, enough witnesses, and enough official involvement to show that something really was happening. And Bashir grew more suspicious. He watched people. He wondered who might be connected. He tried to identify the voice, the watchers, the network, and the reason. He looked back to Beirut, to the men who had taken him, to the accusation that he worked for the CIA, to the party, to the hotel, to the life he had once shared with his wife in Lebanon. Somewhere in all of that, he believed, was the first knot in the thread. But he could never untie it, and because he could not untie it, the fear kept reproducing itself. A stranger at a petrol station could be part of it. A man in a restaurant could be part of it. A customer asking too many questions could be part of it. Bashir's health suffered under that pressure. Reports and later summaries describe him checking himself into mental health facilities more than once. People can be pushed into collapse by real harassment, especially when the harassment is sustained, targeted, and unresolved. The cruel irony is that seeking help did not protect him. There are rational possibilities. Someone may have had access to his circle, his employees and family contacts, or records of where he was staying. Restaurants are busy places, and information moves easily through staff, customers, suppliers, and gossip. Hospitals and facilities involve paperwork, visitors, phone directories, and human error. A determined harasser with enough contacts could find more than most people imagine. Because L'Enfant was human, then someone spent years choosing to do this. Someone lifted receiver after receiver from payphone after payphone and used a childlike voice to frighten a man who had already been tortured. Someone kept track of him. Someone found him again and again. Someone continued long after the joke, if it ever was a joke, should have died. And if more than one person was involved, the question becomes darker. Why would a group of people dedicate years to terrorizing a restaurant owner? What did they believe he had done? What did they believe he knew? Or had Bashir simply become the target of something that no longer needed a reason? A harassment campaign that continued just because it could. By the early 1990s, the story had drawn media attention, including the Los Angeles Times article that laid out the broad shape of Bashir's ordeal. It was the sort of story that seemed almost impossible to categorize, too documented to be dismissed as urban legend, too strange to feel like an ordinary stalker case, and too unresolved to offer comfort. Eventually, according to later accounts, the calls faded. Not with an arrest, not with a confession, not with Bashir finally learning who had been behind the voice. They simply stopped, or at least stopped being documented in the same way. And Bashir was left with silence. And silence, after years of ringing phones, is not the same as peace. Because it can feel like something is waiting. Because when nobody knows why something began, nobody can know whether it has truly ended. For most of us, a ringing phone is ordinary. A customer, a friend, a wrong number. For Bashir, it became something else entirely, a reminder that the past had not finished with him. And somewhere, whether in a booth on a Washington Street corner, in a network of people who never came forward, or in the mind of one caller who knew far too much, L'Enfant lifted the receiver again and again. Then one day, the line went dead, and no one ever explained why.
Ever notice how life's best stories don't happen in your living room? They happen on the open road, out on the water, or parked under the stars. At Progressive, they get that you want to focus on the experience, not worry about the what-ifs. That's why they offer quality insurance designed for your ride, whether that's a boat, RV, or motorcycle. Adventure with confidence. Visit Progressive.com and see how easy it is to protect your favorite way to get away. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in D.C. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Life experience is an excellent teacher. It's time you get the recognition you deserve for those hard-earned lessons. Purdue Global values the experience working adults bring to the table. Whether you're interested in a rapidly growing field like cybersecurity, business, nursing, or any of Purdue Global's other 170 programs, earning the credentials you need may be faster than you think. Try our experience calculator to see if you could be eligible for course credit and start your comeback today at purdueglobal.edu.
What was it? Who was making all of those phone calls? I don't know, and I do hate these stories when I don't know what happened. There's no conclusion to any of it. And was it paranormal? I don't know. Why was he taken? Was he part of the CIA? Don't know. And I'm going to leave you all not knowing as well, unless you find out and you let me know. Well, that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you again on Monday for the Haunted episode. Take care, everyone.
Ever notice how life's best stories don't happen in your living room? They happen on the open road, out on the water, or parked under the stars. At Progressive, they get that you want to focus on the experience, not worry about the what-ifs. That's why they offer quality insurance designed for your ride, whether that's a boat, RV, or motorcycle. Adventure with confidence. Visit Progressive.com and see how easy it is to protect your favorite way to get away. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in D.C. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Do you keep hearing podcast ads, like this one, for example, but always wonder how you actually get involved with them for your own brand or organization? Well, it's easier than you think. We're Acast, and we give you the platform to do it all yourself. Browse thousands of popular podcasts, choose the shows that match your perfect audience, set your budget, and launch. And if you want a hand, our podcast specialists are there to help you launch with confidence. This is podcast advertising without barriers. Get started at acast.com/advertise.
The stories told on the Whispering Woods are inspired by historical records, witness reports, and local folklore. While every effort is made to research and represent events accurately, some details, names, and locations may differ from official accounts or have been changed out of respect for those involved. These episodes are created for storytelling and entertainment purposes and should not be considered definitive fact or investigative journalism.